Hello, and welcome to Incorporating Real-World Connections into Science Instruction. I'm glad you could join us. I'm Terry Shiverdecker, Science Content Specialist for the Ohio Resource Center. In this webcast, we will discuss the benefits of making connections between real science content and real-world experiences, provide some examples of how real-world connections can be used in lessons, and share some tips for starting to add real-world connections to your lessons. We will also discuss how all of this helps students prepare for the OGT. You can join our discussion by submitting your email questions about today's topic. Use the Submit a Question button and do so early. We'll answer as many as we can at the end of the live program. Now I'd like to welcome our panelists, Scott Barber, middle school science teacher at Rome Middle School, and Linda Pettit, environmental education specialist at Franklin Soil and Water Conservation District.
Thank you for having me.
Well,
Thank
welcome.
you.
I'm glad you're here. How would you describe real-world connections?
I would say real-world connections are something that you can relate to everyday life. It's getting the students to something that they can relate to. The interesting part about being real-world connections is sometimes some kids are interested and others aren't, and vice versa. And it keeps changing. There's always new opportunities. So my suggestion is to keep your eyes open for different opportunities.
And from a teacher perspective, to me, real-world connections is, are you connecting your content to students' lives? Students are changing, science is changing, the world is changing, and it's a great opportunity to connect the science to the ever-changing real world.
Yeah, and you both have made the point that things are constantly changing in students' lives. They themselves are changing as they're growing up. And so the thing that is a great real-world connection this year in the classroom, I may need to tweak a little bit next year or the year after that to make it relevant to the kids at that particular point in their lives. So what are some advantages of including real-world connections in science instruction?
I think a couple of advantages. It is a great hook. And once you hook them, you can hold on to them with that science content. They can make a personal attachment to the content that they're learning. There's an excitement factor that, hey, this is real, it really exists, it's happening, especially if it's something that's in their lives. A great example of that is cell phones. That's a real-world current technology that all kids want, a lot of kids have, and to use something like that in the classroom is a great opportunity. Real-world science can be customized to students. If you're teaching forces in motion, it can be done through sports, through dance, skateboarding, really anything that involves movement.
Okay.
Great. I would also say it provides an opportunity for, you mentioned technology. It's a chance for the kids and the parents to relate. The students can come home and talk about, what they did in school today, and that they use this technology and these things, and the parents can say, relate back to, what it was like back in my day. Great example is music and how far we've come with music, from records to cassettes to CDs, and now we're at MP3s and that kind of stuff. So how far we've come is just amazing. I also think that because real-world science connects the science with everyday situations that the kids can relate to, it makes it real. It's not that science person in a lab coat. It's something real, a real career that I think would be more interesting to the students. Also great to integrate the different science disciplines and different subjects all together, and it allows students to see that science really is a part of their everyday life. It's not this abstract topic, but it's real.
Yeah, and I think also there's evidence to suggest that when we use real-world connections in our teaching of science, it tends to improve students' attitudes about science and also their attitudes about science-related careers. And you both made this point about technology. And for a student to be able to think about how that technology has improved over the years, from records to MP3 players, they can start thinking about, well, what had to happen in science before we could capture music and have it on an MP3 player and have it downloadable on the internet and all of that. So it's a great way to make those science and technology connections. So you've given us some interesting information about what we're talking about with real-world connections. Can you give us some examples of real-world connections that can be used in the classroom?
Well, I'd say a field trip opportunity would be kicksailing. It's my favorite opportunity with the students, where we actually go out into the river and look for the macroinvertebrates, the small bugs that live there. And this is real world science, because I talked to the kids about the fact that, we're looking for the water penny beetle larvae and the different animals that live there. The dragonflies, they're familiar with the adult, but they don't know the child lives in the streams. And so there's a lot of animals living in the streams that they just aren't familiar with. And this is real science, because this is how the EPA and Ohio Department of Natural Resources actually do look at the streams and tell the water quality. So they're doing real experiments and real information, the same data that scientists are collecting, which is it's kind of neat. One time when we were doing that, we actually had this white substance coming into the stream, and so we brought it real life because the students wanted to see what was going on with this substance. And when I got back to the office, I could call the Environmental Protection Agency and tell them what we saw, and they did the investigation and found out that it was chlorine from the local swimming pool. And the kids have all been in that swimming pool, and they understand that they use chlorine, but to see it coming into the stream, and then they could investigate, well, what might this do to the life in the stream? What changes could that bring in? And so that was kind of interesting. And then we could talk to them about, well, if you go to a beach and you see on the beach the sign saying don't swim or no fishing and so forth in places where they've been able to do that before, what's different? What do you think might have happened? And so it's interesting to bring it back to home and something they're familiar with. Scott, you live on the lake. You've probably had similar situations.
Oh, sure. I live and teach near the shores of Lake Erie, and I love going to the beach in the summertime, and sometimes there's a red flag flying there and you're not allowed to go into the water, and it can be a beautiful day. Why is that? And that's a great real-world event investigation for kids. It has to do with E. coli in the water, and you can access your local Board of Health. I can access the Cuyahoga County Board of Health, get great data from them, content information. I can get everything I need for kids to go into an investigation of what's happening, how did that bacteria get there, why is it there, when will the beach be safe. A great real-world event and something that kids can relate to.
Okay, great. Well, I know, Scott, that you've done a lot of other real-world investigations in your classroom. Would you continue sharing, please?
Sure. Early on in the school year, I like to do something with shoes. Kids are wearing them to school. I figure, why not use them? All different kinds of shoes, athletic shoes and fashion shoes, whatever it may be. And it's really an investigation of the friction between the shoe and the surface that it's on. And most shoes are designed for a specific purpose, especially if they're for sports. So the kids bring in their favorite pair of shoes, and we do something real simple. We pull the shoes with a Newton scale across different surfaces and collect data from the shoe pulling event. And then we use a formula that's found in the real world. It's called the coefficient of friction. And it's commonly used in basketball and on running tracks to calculate the amount of friction, if there's a correct amount for the activity to happen. So the kids learn all about their shoes, they make personal connections about their shoe, and it is literally a great way to kick off the school year with an inquiry-based real-world activity.
Okay. You mentioned earlier cell phones. And as I understand it, you actually use your cell phones. The kids use their cell phones in the classroom. Tell us a little bit about that.
A cell phone is, once again, that current real-world technology that most kids have, and for them to see that it can be used in a classroom, in a science classroom, is a great opportunity. It can be used, the calculator function on a cell phone is a very obvious example of how you can use it in the classroom. It's great for collecting the digital images for data in any of your experiments. The video feature on cell phones, once again, is wonderful for collecting data in your experiments. And those experiments that I'm talking about are maybe experiments in the classroom, or maybe things that kids are doing at home in their science investigations. A lot of students now are texting to my school email address, their videos and their pictures to support their scientific investigations.
That's great. So we're not only bringing the real world into the classroom in terms of here's the scientific aspects of this thing that happened, but we're also taking the technologies that the students use in their real world and having them apply those technologies in interesting and exciting ways. So, and I know Linda mentioned that you live up on the lake. Are there other examples when you can use the lake in your teaching?
Lake effect snow happens in a few areas in the world. North coast of Ohio happens to border one of the largest lakes in the world, Lake Erie, and lake effect snow is something that happens there. Now, if you're in southern Ohio, you might not fully understand what lake effect snow is, but you'll understand the concept if you've ever taken a shower and you get out of the shower and there's condensation, there's water on your mirror. And that is a great local, real-world event that impacts all students in Northeast Ohio, and they can calculate where the primary and secondary snow belts are based on snowfall data for different cities in various counties. And it's something that we all live through up there. We all drive through, we all walk through, and it's a very fun personal connection that kids can make in a real-world science investigation.
And of course, when that snow falls, we have to drive in it.
Oh yeah, you got to take care of it. You have to drive. You have to drive through it. And you know what we do is we throw salt on the roads. We throw salt on our sidewalks to take care of the snow and the ice. And it doesn't change temperature. If it did, we just throw a lot more of it and have a summer party in January. So what is that salt really doing? You know, how does it melt snow and how does it melt ice? And a simple investigation that I do with the kids is provide them with ice, put it in a cup, cotton string, and some salt, and say, try to catch a cube. Catch a cube. Understand the relationship between the salt and the ice. And it's a great, once again, real-world investigation. And it's something that a lot of kids have never really thought about before. They just see the salt trucks on the roads, or mom or dad or themselves are throwing salt out on the sidewalks. And now they really understand, you know, what's going on and why. And they can make a scientific and a personal connection to that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with the salt and the ice is linking that back to making ice cream. You know, a lot of kids don't experience making homemade ice cream anymore, but if you put you know, we've got the salt and the ice and that solution that forms, and so here we've got this ice melting, but yet it's getting colder. So that sets up some cognitive dissonance for students, and if you can do that and then challenge them to think about, well, what's happening here and why is it happening and why is the ice melting while the ice cream is freezing? You know, those are some really good questions that they can kind of work with. So and Scott, I don't mean to be picking on you, but I know you do a lot of real world connections in your classrooms. So recently we were talking about a situation with a fish kill on Lake Erie. Mm-hmm. So how did you use that in instruction?
As a science teacher, I think even when you're not in the classroom, you're thinking about what can I do to enhance the experience for your kids in the classroom. And that's no different for me. So it was a beautiful March day a couple years ago when I was walking along the shores of Lake Erie, and I had a great time. So I thought I'd do it the next day. When I went the next day, I couldn't find the beach. It was literally covered in thousands upon thousands of these silver dead fish. And I thought, that's really strange, because yesterday there wasn't one. So I ran home, got my digital camera, took pictures. Then I got in contact with a friend of mine who works at the Cuyahoga County Board of Health, and I said, hey, I actually emailed him the pictures too. I said, there's all these dead fish. Can you tell me what's going on? And sure enough, I was provided the information about the fish, which is called a shad, and information about what killed these fish. And it had to do with extreme temperature changes. So I was able to get all that data, and I put the kids in a real-world kind of CSI event. What happened to these fish? Because it was such a shad story of what happened to them. So once again, another real-world connection that the kids really enjoyed. And I think, too, that I brought something into the classroom that just happened at home for me. And we all have things that happen to us at home, things that we experience in everyday life, that really, it's science right before our eyes.
Yeah, and we do, you're right, we see it everywhere, and as science teachers we see it everywhere. So I think part of our job is to find those opportunities and share them with students. And you've both given great examples of unplanned events that turned into learning opportunities. Linda, you were talking about the chlorine when you were kick seining, and how the students then learned and extended their learning beyond the intended consequences, what you had planned. And Scott with talking about the fish kill and the shad and what happened there, and being able to take that into the classroom kind of on the spot and off the cuff and turn them into successful learning experiences. So that's great. So one of the things we've talked about a lot in this series of programs is the learning cycle and inquiry-based instruction. And we know that those are tried and true methods of teaching students science. So how does bringing real-world connections into the classroom, how does that fit into those known instructional frameworks?
I think it fits perfectly. Real world hooks them in. It gets them involved in the learning, which is, the engaging. It gets them engaged, and they want to, find out what's going on, which then leads to them exploring, what's happening in a little bit more detail. Once they've explored something, usually they're pretty excited about what they found, so then they want to explain it to somebody else. And once you're hooked, you're in it for life. So then expanding is natural. Example, with the kick sanding that I mentioned before, most of these kids have never had the experience of going in a creek before, let alone looking for the bugs that live there, and have no idea what they're expecting or what they're going to find. So you get them engaged just by letting them play in water for something a little bit different, and then they get to explore and really find the wealth of different animals that live in the stream. So that's kind of exciting, and then they can go home and explain it to their parents or their friends. This is what we did today, and these are the cool things that we found. And then they're hooked. Next time they get to be near a stream where they can go in, they're turning rocks over to see if they can find the same things, and if they can guess what the water quality might be, in that stream, and compare one stream to another. So it's just kind of a natural fit, for all of that process to follow through.
And a real-world connection is usually an inquiry-based investigation. They're connected. And when it comes to the learning cycle, when I think of learning cycle, I think of the learning cycle of the time that I'm providing the instruction or when the kids are with me. But the ultimate learning cycle is a lifelong learner and the goal of scientific literacy for the students. And I think what that real-world connection offers is an opportunity to put into place practice for scientific literacy for students, because ultimately their learning cycle, I want them to be scientifically literate adults.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about situations where the topic is one that you just can't get them out into the world or bring the world into the classroom? Any thoughts about how?
Oh, absolutely.
That?
Sometimes when you look through your standards, there are things that just naturally lend themselves to a real-world connection. And sometimes there's stuff where it's more challenging. For example, 8th grade has space science. That's a little bit more challenging. But there are ways of bringing real-world experiences into the classroom. For example, NASA has great resources, computer simulations, educational gaming. You can enter the models. You can enter the virtual world for some of those indicators and standards that maybe that natural hands-on inquiry piece of traditional science instruction make it more challenging. So yeah, online is a great resource, educational gaming and simulations, the virtual world.
So we know this inquiry into real-world connections can happen in a stream, it can happen out on a field trip, it can happen in the classroom, or it can happen in a virtual environment. So I think of all of those sorts of places when you're thinking about how can I make these real-world connections. So we know this is good for students and good for learning. So how does this making real-world connections help to prepare students for the OGT?
On the screen right now, you're going to see a picture. And this picture shows an inclined plane and a piece of wood. And it has to do with friction. Now, if a student encounters this question, hopefully their experience from what I talked about earlier when they were pulling their shoes across different surfaces gave them enough experience and real-world connection to friction that when they encounter that question, they have a personal basis to help them answer it correctly, or to be more successful when they run into questions like that.
Okay, good. Linda?
I was going to say, too, that just the whole idea of the real-world situations, it's naturally standard-based. The process is, like you said, the inquiry, it leads them into many of the standards just naturally. And even in the Big Green Book, the academic content standards for science, it talks about, there's a page that talks about the real-world connections and how you can make those connections and give some ideas on how they're integrated. So, everything is connected to the standards, in real life. Everything is connected in real life. So it just makes sense to put the two together.
And I think one thing that's important to understand is that the OGT test and the OAT test are grade band level tests, and they cover multiple years of science content. and we want to prepare our kids to the best of their ability for that. And using the real-world connections will help make that content stay with them. They will be able to relate to it both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And I think that really is a strengthening component and a very valuable piece of real-world-based instruction.
Yeah, I think that's great. And Linda, as you mentioned, the standards are very broad. So just about anything we bring in that's a real-world connection will in some way link to the standards. And we worry sometimes if we're a 10th grade teacher, well, they're going to be tested over stuff in the 9th grade. If we're an 8th grade teacher, well, they're going to be tested over stuff they learned in the 6th or the 7th grade. But those grade band spans and getting that information to stick with the student, not only until they've taken the test, but as the point you both have made, but throughout their life. And the other thing with connecting that to the standards, Linda, you mentioned what's in the book. And if you haven't found that in your Big Green Book, as you called it, it's on page 285. And I'd encourage you to take a look at that. That's some good information. So you've provided lots of information, and I know our viewers out there are getting really excited about making these real-world connections. So what can teachers do to plan a lesson or a unit in which they're incorporating real-world connections?
I think as a practicing teacher, one thing you want to do is you want to stay within your comfort zone. You want to make the experience fun. Just start with one benchmark or one indicator and think, how does this relate to something in the real world? And start from there. And it doesn't have to happen immediately, but get it started. And one thing that you'll find out is once you start doing that, it builds and it builds and it builds, and it's really fun because you are seeing science in the world as it's happening before your eyes.
I think that comfort zone is really important also. There's so many different ways that you can do, real-world science. You can do it, teacher-guided if that's your style. You can do it inquiry-based if you're more open for that. So, it can be adapted to your comfort zone, as you said. You can use internet resources if you need to bring those in for extra information. But the important thing is once you start looking around for things, you'll find them everywhere. They're in the grocery store, they're driving down the street, they're shoveling the snow. You will find real-world situations that you can bring in. The kids may even bring in real-world situations that can be used in the classroom. So just start looking.
Yeah, and that point about starting in your comfort zone, if you're not comfortable with sports, if you don't know anything about it, don't start there. If you're comfortable taking kids into a stream, start there. And then once you see how kids respond to this and the difference it makes in your teaching, I think you're both right. You're going to start there and you're just going to go and run with it. Linda, I know, and we mentioned earlier that you're with the Franklin County Soil and Water Conservation District. Can you offer some suggestions for making good use of local and state resources?
Absolutely. There's a lot of them out there. Soil and Water Conservation Districts, for example, there's one in every county in the state of Ohio. There's one all over the United States. There's a national association. But within our local soil and water conservation districts, there may be an education specialist like myself. There may not be, but there's always somebody there who has education information, models to loan and things like that. One thing that we're getting into more every day is the geographic information system and the modern technologies. So you can get different layers of maps through the GIS, through your local soil and water district. We have aerial photographs. So we at our office we go back to the 1930s, but then you can look up modern day and see how things have changed. What used to be where your school is now, for example. So there's a lot of resources that way. Your extension offices are great places to look also if you're looking for plant or horticulture information, especially. ODNR has a wealth of information on their website, and then you can go to different places through there, to Division of Wildlife, who also has loan kits and background information, forestry, state parks for locations, all that kind of thing. The EPA is fantastic. They have a great website that has information for students and information for teachers. So that's one to check. One that you might not think of is the Farm Bureau website. If you click on the neighbors on the Farm Bureau website, it also gives places that you can go to visit, and also has background information. So those are some, local, state, and local places. Also, again, looking into technology and bringing things in. There's the NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, has a fantastic website with oceans and weather and that kind of information. And NASA obviously is great, like Scott mentioned before. So there's a lot of resources out there that way. And I know, Scott, you've used some local ones as well.
Yeah, there's other resources. Your local TV station and their accompanying website can be a wealth of weather and energy-related weather event data. Archive data, current data, and that ever important real-time data for that ever real-time changing world. Your local, regional, state, and even national businesses are great places to find real-world resources. Maybe your local businesses can help out with materials or content information. I know more national companies or companies outside of your area, online resources, educational resources are often there. Students are a great resource. You would not believe how many experts you have for some of your science content within your students. You might have a fantastic skateboarding student who can help you with that. Parents are another excellent resource to tap into. Universities, to your colleges. As I mentioned before, the internet is a great place to find real-world data. As mentioned, the companies that have educational arms on their websites are just a great place to find things to enhance your real-world instruction.
Okay, what about other facilities, types of places where students may have experienced in their life?
Oh, Cedar Point. A virtual roller coaster is great, but there's nothing like being on an actual roller coaster. And amusement parks provide content information, inquiry-based activities, and almost all the amusement parks have a physics day where you get to actually go there and engage in all the things that you've been learning about. Sporting venues. I love baseball. The Cleveland Indians, the Akron Arrows, a lot of other baseball teams in the state have educational days. The Cleveland Indians revolves around weather. And once again, those moments where just things happen. This summer I was attending a baseball game, and if you were an organ donor, you could get a free pair of sunglasses. And I'm an organ donor. It's on my license, and I got my pair of sunglasses, and I thought, you know what, I would love 30 of these to do a real-world investigation revolving around ultraviolet light. And I simply asked, and they were more than accommodating. I walked away with 30 pair of sunglasses. Linda has some other great ideas for places.
I'm always looking at natural settings, so I think about your local metro parks, community parks, township parks are great places. I mentioned the state parks as possibilities before. Arboretums, and you mentioned some of the colleges and universities. A lot of those have horticulture places or arboretums that can be checked out. So there's a lot of local areas that you can go to check out for resources.
Okay, well, you guys have provided fabulous information, and we've got some email questions that I'd like to share with you, and so you can customize a bit for our viewers. So here's one from a 10th grade biology teacher. I'm a 10th grade biology teacher. Can you give me some more examples of real-world connections for biology?
I've got one.
Great, go for it.
Okay. We're going to Lake Erie again, and this can happen in any local body of water in your area. There is a situation, especially after it rains, where fertilizer washes into Lake Erie. And you wouldn't think that would be a bad thing because, it serves as a catalyst for growth. But the algae is growing at an extremely fast rate. And when that algae dies, things happen. We call it a dead zone. And it affects a lot of the biological life in Lake Erie. That is a great real-world connection that is really happening all around. And students can have a direct impact on that. What do you put on your lawn? Okay? And then where does that go when it rains? Where does that go when it washes down your drive or your sidewalk? So there's an example of biological real-world connection.
Yeah, okay. Linda?
I was going to say that's a great connection, too, just to get the whole watershed awareness. Like you said, where does the water go? You know, the storm drains, a lot of people, you know, we call them storm sewers. They think that, you know, that water goes to the sewer system, and that's not true. You know, find out where does that drain to. It's something that they can investigate and find out, you know, what's going on there as well.
And now we've actually got an integrated piece where we're looking at the watershed, we're looking at some earth science information as well as life science information. So those are good suggestions. So Linda, and I think this question may be for you, who do I talk to when I call local and state agencies?
Okay, some of them are going to have education people like myself, and so, you know, you could ask for that. If not, I would just, you know, call whoever answers the phone and say, you know, this is what I need to know. I'm looking for the education, an education component, and they'd be able to help you out. Scott, I'm sure you've done that. How have you approached the same thing?
Sure. If I'm looking on the internet, maybe it's a company, I'll look to see if they have an educational link or a contact us button, and I'll just start typing, you know, I am a 7th grade science teacher and I work with kids, yada, yada, yada. Another one is if I'm picking up the phone, I might call a company and say, I'm a science teacher and I have some ideas and I was hoping that maybe you could help me out. Is there someone I could talk to? Who could I talk to? But when you mention that you are a teacher and that you're working with kids and you think they have something that could be of value, most businesses, organizations, companies, and people are more than willing to help out.
Okay, great. This question is really, it's from a teacher, and I'm sure representing groups of teachers that we sometimes don't think about enough. First, there's a nice compliment. These are great strategies. As an intervention specialist, we have to establish real-world connections routinely. Are there specific ORC lesson plans available with accommodation for general ed teachers?
There's always an opportunity for a real-world connection.
Oh,
Yeah.
And a lot of time when I look at the ORC resources, which to me is a virtual goldmine, I will think of, where do I see this where I live? And then I might make that contact. We talked about weather a little bit. If I find a great weather-based lesson on the ORC collection, then I'm going to go to my local TV's website and see that real-time data again, or if they have anything that can enhance the lesson. And I think that's a good word, enhance. And we're always looking at ways to make what we do better and to have better impact on our students. So the quick response is, no matter where you're getting your lesson content from, there's going to be a real-world connection.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And some of the ORC lesson plans actually do have suggestions as to how you might modify the lesson and so on. But we also have on our new teacher survival guide, we have a section for dealing with special needs in the classroom, and that section is growing. We're adding more resources to it all the time. And actually here in not too terribly long, there'll be a podcast added to that. So I think we have time for one more question. So I think I'm going to go with this one. How often do you do real-world investigations?
As a practicing teacher, you know, it changes because the more I teach, the more years I teach, the more frequently I implement the real-world connections because I've been doing it longer. I'm cataloging some things. But I would say this, you got to start somewhere, and then you just add to it. And I know it's something that can't be done every day. It can take time, and it is something that when you do it, you'll see what you might want to change, what you might not want to change as well. But quarterly to me is a nice way to kind of attack it right away. A nice quarterly real-world event. That's probably a good place to start. Or we're in the second half of the school year here. What can I do now to kind of plan for a real-world event for next year? So.
Okay. Good. Linda?
I would say as a resource professional, I'm the one that goes in, and is the guest speaker in the classroom. I always try to connect what I'm talking about to something the kids can relate to. I always try to make it real world. Now I have the advantage that my topics are limited. I do soil and water, working for the Soil and Water Conservation District. But when we do the soil programs, we talk about, how does this relate to gardening in your backyard? How do you notice that plants grow better in one part of your yard than another part? Well, why do you think that is? So, we relate to that. And the other piece, like I mentioned, is the seining and the fact that you're being real scientists doing this, and the whole water quality issue. As far as can you go boating, can you go swimming, those kinds of things. So I think it's important to try to relate what you're teaching to something the kids are familiar with, to make that connection and make it sink in.
And speaking of the connections, Linda is a professional, and I'm a teacher, and even an opportunity to get together and talk like today is really neat, because ultimately we have the same goal. We want to impact kids. And Linda is a content specialist in water and soil conservation for Franklin County. Mm-hmm. Bring her into your classroom. She's got all the knowledge there. So when you can bring in those experts from the teacher standpoint, that's extremely helpful. And I know that when Linda's probably done working with the students, she's leaving the teacher a bunch of great stuff. So tap those professionals out there, or those experts, I guess, in their field. And because I know as a science teacher, we're covering a lot of content, and we might not be experts in all that content area, because that's not what we're supposed to be. But pulling those people in from the outside strengthens content for the students, and it actually makes you a better teacher as well. So utilize those people out there, I guess, is another big tip.
Yeah, the one thing I love to say about that too is, I come in and generally I'm saying the same thing the teacher's already told them, or it's very similar information. So it's making the teacher more credible. See, this content person who came in said the same thing you did. So it's like backing you up. See, you do know what you're talking about. So, especially with middle school students, it's nice to have somebody else say, yeah, your teacher's right. Listen to them.
Yeah.
So we work together.
Yeah, and that's great. And I like that you do one thing, I do another thing, and together we're stronger than we are apart.
Absolutely.
So that's all the questions that we have time for now. But I wondered if you each might have some final thoughts that you'd like to share with us. Scott?
If you're viewing this webcast, I hope it serves as an opportunity to invite a real-world connection into your classroom. And I know a lot of times we are kind of driven by these content standards and benchmarks and indicators. But when you bring that real-world connection in, you've integrated your science so well. And it's very exciting, just not for a teacher, but for the kids. So use this chance as a way to move to the next step. Make it happen in your classroom.
Okay, great. Linda?
And I'm going to echo what Scott said before. You don't have to do it alone. Bring in the resources, look for, different opportunities and to do that. And I'd say once you get started, you're going to get hooked. Once you've found, one opportunity or one real world situation, you'll keep seeing them everywhere you go. So just, like Scott said, just do it, because you're gonna see it grow, and I think you'll really see the light bulbs go off over your students' heads, and it makes a lot more sense.
Great points. Thank you, Linda and Scott, for participating in this program and sharing your expertise with other science educators in the state.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Okay, good. And thank you for your participation and email questions. In this webcast, we've described the advantages of incorporating real-world connections into science instruction, provided some examples of lessons based on real-world connections, offered suggestions for making use of local and state resources. Additional information is available in the supporting materials found on the Science Instructional Strategies, a look at the OGT homepage at www.ohioRC.org/for/science/OGT. If you would like to learn more about these topics, please contact ORC at web@ohioRC.org. We would be happy to work collaboratively with you to plan, to plan district or building-wide professional development programs. For the Ohio Resource Center, I'm Terry Shiverdecker, wishing you success with all of your science instructional strategies.